During this video, we are going to talk about the rise of labor unions and a few different labor strikes that happened in the late 1800s, early 1900s that had a real big impact on the way that labor unions operated. So working conditions back in the day were not very great. Um, Conditions were extremely dangerous. They were unhealthy. You didn't have any breaks. You worked extremely long hours for little pay. And that also applied to children. So there was really no laws that protected the worker or any groups that really protected the worker. It was all about the owner or the boss making as much money as possible. Here is a picture of two little boys inside of a coal mine, and this picture was taken in 1908 in West Virginia. You can see that they're totally dirty. Their faces are covered in soot. They're just kind of there working instead of being in school. And here is a picture of the newsies, which are little boys that would sell newspapers, and that was their job. You could tell that the age varies in this picture, but you have a kid that's, 9, and then another kid that's maybe 10, 11, 12. But these are all kids that, again, should be in school. And here's this little boy standing on one of the trolley cars. He's only 5 years old, and instead of him being in school learning his ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, he's out selling newspapers for a living. And this little boy was working at a steel company. Steel companies were extremely dangerous, but it didn't care that you were a little kid or that you were, 12, 13, 14 years old. If you could work, you were working, and you would work long hours and receive very little pay. Here you have little girls that are working in a factory in Tennessee. A lot of times little kids were used because their fingers are small, so they're able to do certain work on machinery. Little girls didn't necessarily work in coal mines or in steel factories, but it was very common for them to work in textile factories. And this little boy ends up losing 2 of his fingers in a work accident. When a piece of machinery fell on his foot, he kind of falls forward, he puts his hand into a spinning machine, and then 2 of his fingers get basically crushed. Again, he could have been between the ages of 11 through 13, 11, 12, 13. And here he is now with only 8 fingers instead of 10, when he should have very well been in school. So with all these different things going on, and I know that the pictures primarily focused on child labor, but you also had abuses of adult workers. You now have the workers organizing. The Knights of Labor formed in 1869, and they are the first labor union in the United States. They had 3 major goals: a shorter workday, they wanted to end child labor, and they wanted equal pay for both men and women. When the labor unions did not get from management what they expected to get, they would call the workers to strike. So here you have a strike in a factory that happened in 1886, and it was clashed with strike breakers. So basically you'd have the regular workers would go on strike, and the owners would bring in people to work in replacement of the striking workers. They started to basically fight, and you had 2 workers that were killed by the policemen. When news got out that the cops had killed 2 of the strikers, you had thousands of people gather in Haymarket Square to protest the killings. A bomb went off, killing a police officer, and basically what happened was a riot. So you had 4 protesters and 7 more police officers were killed. This becomes known as the Haymarket Riot. Here is a drawing of the Haymarket Riot. You basically see, fire going on in the background. The police officers are firing into a crowd of strike workers or factory workers, and the factory workers are striking back. It was total chaos. You had thousands of people that were kind of rebelling and revolting, rioting against the system. Another early labor union is known as the American Federation of Labor, also known as the AFL, and it was founded in 1886 by Samuel Gompers. Eventually, the AFL joins the CIO, the Congress of Industrial Organizations, and they're now a labor union that is made up of many different trade unions. And here are all the different trade unions that are covered under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO. So you have the United Farm Workers of America, you have the firefighters, you have steel workers, you have a group of teachers on there, postal workers, and you have a group of actors. So all of these unions are under the umbrella of the AFL-CIO. George Pullman had a railroad car factory. And what he would do to keep his workers working longer hours is he would actually set up homes right near the factory, and he would charge the workers rent. So he decides in 1893 that he is going to cut the salaries of his workers, but he did not reduce the rent in the homes that the workers were renting. So the strikers decided to go on strike, and you can see over here a picture of the strikers walking out of the Pullman factory. And here is another picture of the Pullman strikers, and you can see how the cops are, or in this case the National Guard, are lined up defending the building. And here you have a drawing of the Pullman strike, of the National Guard firing into a group of strikers. This was published in a weekly magazine, and obviously depicts as though the strikers are the victims and the National Guard is just taking advantage of them. After violence occurred at the Pullman strike, you had a federal judge that issued an injunction. So basically the government forced the workers back to work and actually arrested the union leaders, saying that they were violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. And if you guys remember from the previous video, the Sherman Antitrust Act basically prohibits companies from eliminating their competition or from creating monopolies. Even though all the pictures and drawings depict men that are involved in these strikes, you actually had a lot of women that were also involved in the labor movement. Mother Jones became a nationwide known figure for the labor movement. By 1840, you had over 1 million women working in factories. So it wasn't just guys, but it was also the ladies. And speaking of the ladies, in 1911, you actually had a fire in a shirt factory where you had 150 people, mostly young women, that were trapped inside of the factory, and they actually ended up dying in the factory. Here is a picture of the fire engines going to the Triangle Shirtwaist Company fire. Obviously, you didn't have fire engines like you do today. It was horse and carriage. And here's a picture of them on their way to try to put out the fire in a 10-story building. Here is another picture of the devastation from within. The fire escape had actually been locked and was blocked by different sewing materials because it was a shirt factory. And you also had multiple doors that were locked in order to prevent the ladies from taking breaks or from just wandering out in the hallways. Basically, it was to trap them inside of the room so that they would actually work. But when the fire started, those doors were locked. So where were these girls supposed to go? The fire escape had also collapsed. So a lot of the girls that died because they were trapped and there was literally no way out of the factory. Here is a picture of the bodies that were taken from the factory. The bodies were laid out, and they invited people to kind of walk up and down past these coffins to see if they could identify the bodies, because they were so burnt and they couldn't recognize who was who. So they literally just laid the bodies out, and people from all around New York City would walk up and down and try to identify their sister, their daughter, their wife, and so that they could be removed and given a proper burial. After the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire, the need for labor protection grew exponentially. So you had a lot of labor unions, but you also had some various other groups like religious communities or different political groups, social reform organizations that used the momentum from this tragedy to really gain awareness and to gain the trust of the public that labor unions were a good thing and that protection for the workers was necessary. Here is a drawing that was published in a magazine depicting the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. You can see the locked door. You can see the ladies that are kind of engulfed in flames, but they're trying to knock at the door, knock on the window for someone to let them out. This was very powerful, and with these images and the dead bodies that were laid out, it actually did help make some changes. After the fire, new laws indeed were passed to protect factory workers, and there were multiple of them, ranging from building inspection to the to providing fire extinguishers, alarms, sprinklers, better locations to eat so that way you don't have things that are nearly flammable all in one place. So in total you had 64 different laws that came out of this one fire and this one tragedy, but it definitely helped shape the labor unions and the influence that they have in creating laws to protect the workers. So your notes are complete if you are able to answer the following questions. You should know the working conditions in the factory, the role that the children had in factories, the Knights of Labor, the AFL-CIO, the Haymarket riot and the Pullman strike, and also the Triangle Shirtwaist fire. Once you guys are done reviewing your notes and making sure they are totally complete, make sure you answer your blog. I will see you guys tomorrow in class.